Now that was unexpected, but this is something else entirely. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon, I'm back and I'm joined by Angus Gallager. Today we look back at the British Grand Prix, but first of all, in some breaking news in terms of today, that being Tuesday the 11th of July, there's been something that's bumped to the top of the order, that being that Daniel Ricciardo is back, making a surprise return to Formula 1, driving for Alpha Tauri. And that means that Nyck de Vries has been dropped now after only 10 races. He's going to be no longer racing for Alpha Tauri this season. It's a decision that comes in with immediate effect, should I say. Something that took me by surprise, Angus. What about yourself?
Yeah, it did. I mean, despite the rumour and conjecture that has been going on for a while now, as it does in the F1 paddock, as it can do, because it's we talk about silly season often, but silly season tends to, apply throughout the year, I'd say, honestly. It just happens to just rumours swirl around. But this really is like something which you could have seen coming at some point, and we were led to believe that De Vries would have had until at least the summer break, because he was given, I think, a 3-race ultimatum. So it was the 3 races before the summer break, which was Silverstone, Hungary and Belgium. But they've decided to ditch him already. Which I think that, well, firstly, if you'd said to me before the start of the season that Logan Sargeant would last longer than Nyck de Vries, I would have laughed at you. I'd have said, what on earth are you talking about? Logan Sargeant is not going to outstay Nyck de Vries. Partially because Nyck de Vries has looked like he has so much potential. That visit to the Williams team last year, qualified 13th, and then that got elevated to 8th place. He drove a stellar race in the race itself to come home in 9th, and he's got points on debut, and all of a sudden he's got the whole paddock swarming around him, wanting to sign him ahead of the next season. He was hot property, and now 12 months later or so, well, not even that, about 10 months later, in fact it's 10 months to the day since he got 9th in that Grand Prix in Italy. He's out the door. Shocking, perhaps, for its ruthlessness and how quickly it's happened. Shocking as well for the fact that we thought that this necessarily wouldn't come to fruition until the end of the season, maybe. Also shocking, I'm sure we'll get onto it in great depth, his replacement, Daniel Ricciardo. The story arc of his just keeps on developing. Turned 34 last week. Was at severe risk, arguably, of his F1 career being finished after that McLaren dumping. But he's found a way back in. He's got a seat at Alpha Tauri. Everyone's going to now be saying, well, is this an audition for him to be on the path to being in the main team, the main Red Bull team? Is this a sign of things to come? Is this possibly a chance for Alpha Tauri to get a look at him because they see him as a better prospect for the Red Bull team than Nyck de Vries ever would be? So many questions, and I'm going to let you try and start to answer some of those, to be fair. What do you think, Tom? Would you say it's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, you're bang on there. Unprecedented, I think, the word that springs to mind for myself, really. And there's some thoughts from Tristan as well. He's not with us today, as you've probably gathered, but we'll try and put those in at some point. But I was shocked by it because you normally see something happen in the summer break, as you say, or towards the end. And yes, Nyck de Vries hasn't had a very good start to the season, I think it's fair to say. 0 points, back-to-back P17 finishes. Little light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. But the decision to get rid of him now, I think, probably should have been done, if you bear with me for a moment, at the start of the season. I don't see why Daniel Ricciardo wasn't in that Alpha Tauri seat, that car, from the get-go, really, because it was clear from very early on he was going to remain with Red Bull, or indeed rejoin them as a reserve driver. So why not go and grab the bull by the horns, jump back into the seat, if you will, and have another go? The fact that he didn't, we can only, I suppose, speculate at this point, but part of me thinks, is it an issue with pay or salary? Because we know that he didn't join Haas for that very reason. Was it a shock and awe after being, let's be honest, below par, really, at McLaren, or something else entirely? It's will remain to be seen, maybe coming up in future documentaries. But surprising that it's happened now for De Vries, and I can't help but feel quite sad for him. I never really got the hype, if I'm being honest. I thought that the fact that he got one good result and sat next to Toto Wolff gave him an inflated sense of how good he was, really, when you consider he was getting into Formula One at such an elderly age for the sportsman, if you will. But sad that it's happened, and for me, it also begs the question, what is Alpha Tauri now? Because they dubbed themselves as a sister team, but when you've got Daniel Ricciardo, who's 34, going into that team now, and then you've got Tsunoda, who's wanting to get up the pecking order, if you will, to replace what Perez one day. You've got Liam Lawson, another example about somebody who wants to ultimately get into Formula One. It's yet again a vague turn of events, really, when it comes to the future direction of Alpha Tauri. They clearly don't want to be seen as a junior team anymore. But I suppose for Ricciardo, it's a bastion of fire, if you will, in many ways, because he's going into the Hungarian Grand Prix, where qualifying track position is so important. And if you don't get off to a good start, as we saw with him in McLaren season 1 and 2, it's difficult for him really to go and pick that up. He's more of a patchy streak driver, if you will. Do you think that's fair? Can he rekindle some form, maybe?
I think that this is possibly his last chance saloon to rekindle some form, because he's still damaged, I think, by that year on the sideline, or on the sidelines. It might as well have been a year on the sidelines at McLaren last year for the work that he did there. I think that he'd been, let's be honest, pretty well beaten by Verstappen in their final year together at Red Bull after Verstappen had a slow start. He had done well at Renault, but not incredibly well. I mean, he got on the podium a couple of times, which was impressive in a pretty bog standard car, but there was nothing too spectacular. The McLaren, the win was the standout of a pretty average first year there in 2021, and then last year, just instead of going from strength to strength, went from weakness to weakness, to be honest with you. So for him, definitely a last chance to prove himself. I think that I found it from my side that he has a route back in, almost because of how popular he is. He can ride that wave of popularity, and he's been spoken about as it's brilliant he's back in the paddock, he's back in Formula One, like how great is it to see Ricciardo. And what was it that Tristan referenced earlier, how Christian Horner was at the fan zone on the weekend at Silverstone and said, would you like me if I brought him back? And I'm sure the answer would be yes, because Ricciardo is very popular. He's massive personality. He's very well liked across the world and by F1 fans. So that for sure is carrying him on a crest of a wave. I'd be fascinated to see how he does against Tsunoda, because Tsunoda is a good benchmark, I think. It'll be a good benchmark for Ricciardo and for Tsunoda. It'll be a good one for Ricciardo to see if he's still got it, see if the dip that's occurred is a permanent one or a temporary one. And Tsunoda, for him, it's a chance to... I mean, he's pretty much quite convincingly beaten De Vries. So for him, it's going to be a chance to see, can he cut it against someone who was one of the primary drivers in the sport over the last decade or so. I really like your point about Alpha Tauri. What is it? Is it a talent factory? Is it something which is just sitting there on the grid? We've heard rumours about it being sold to anyone really, because Red Bull is starting to think, what's the purpose of it? And the more and more you see it, they already had diverted from their young driver strategy by bringing in De Vries. Okay, now perhaps that's because of the lack of options. You mentioned Liam Lawson, who had an alright year in F2 last year, now doing well in the Japanese Formula Japan Super Formula over there. But what's the point of having that if they're not going to be promoted, and instead you're going to bring back what some might say is a more of an old showman. So Alpha Tauri's places, but especially now, Alpha Tauri have gone from being a team which even the last couple of years in the hands of Gasly, they'd really punched above their weight, and now they lie there. They're bottom of the Constructors' Championship, which I can't remember happening in my time watching F1.
No, we're going to go and rattle through some of Tristan's points as well. He says, to start with, it's great to have Daniel Ricciardo back. Looking at De Vries, he said, he's a rookie. If they, that being AlphaTauri, are not willing to give him a chance, then why bother? He was actually starting to show some potential, allegedly, and so disappointed that wouldn't even keep him to the end of the season. Ricciardo must now prove why he's stolen, quote, this seat, and he has to do really what Verstappen did to Daniel Kvyat. And he finishes this with a question saying, do you think Perez is worried? And personally, I don't think Perez is worried in the slightest. In fact, I think he's more secure, because if you're Red Bull and you're going to be replacing Sergio Perez with Daniel Ricciardo, that is quite a conservative and being diplomatic move. So let's say Perez falls off a cliff after summer, going into summer. I imagine they being Red Bull, are looking more at someone like Lando Norris per se than Daniel Ricciardo, a 34-year-old. But maybe not. Maybe they're, as they say, keeping within the Red Bull family, if you will, which is something that's happened fairly frequently, with De Vries being the exception.
I find it interesting he mentions about De Vries showing some potential, because I agree with you there, I think, in that I haven't really seen De Vries at any point rise up and show much potential. Even in qualifying for Silverstone this weekend, he was half a second off. Admittedly, okay, fine, that was in more challenging conditions, so maybe that's a bit more unfair to have that as a barometer. But even in Austria, he was dead last. He was two and a bit tenths off Tsunoda on a track which is the shortest of the season. You're right that he has lagged behind, and he's not looked anything like the driver who ironically did one race for Williams last year. And it's really odd that he can come in. Admittedly, he was up against Nicholas Latifi, so again, not a hugely realistic barometer if you're looking for good, accurate results as to whether a driver is fast. But at the same time, it's really weird that you think that he had a situation where he came in and he was unprepared, literally could not have been more unprepared, because he only did one practice session in a quali before the race. And in that he excelled, but then in a situation where he's had the ultimate preparation, he's just not gelled. And I wonder if there's something going on behind the scenes, because he really has, lots of F1 experts are saying, he's going to be brilliant. He's 20, he may be old, but he's got experience. He's a Formula E champion. He has shown well in tests. And if the experts are saying that, you think, well, you know what, they know what they're talking about. So it's fair enough for us to get on board with them. But they've been dead wrong. He's been absolutely nothing, absolutely nowhere. So it's really, really odd that he's been in this situation, because he showed all the signs and hasn't delivered at all.
No, agreed. And going back to that Perez point, if you were Sergio Perez, reading this on your phone or elsewhere or being told about it, would you be concerned? How would you feel about the whole thing?
I think that I might be thinking, why are they bringing in Ricciardo? Because that would suggest perhaps that they're angling to get him back in the main team at some point. You got to bear in mind, I think, that Verstappen in that team will be all powerful, as Michael Schumacher used to be at Ferrari, as Lewis Hamilton, as much as we are told, probably was at Mercedes when he had Bottas especially as a teammate. And I think that you want your main driver, your double world champion, who's won 6 races in a row. You want them to have somebody alongside them who they like. Okay, you want them. Yep. They're going to wield the power, and they want someone alongside them. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that it appears that Verstappen and Perez get on very well. They're from quite different. They're quite different personalities, and they're from quite different worlds. But I get the impression they get on very well. Any competition that Perez might have exuded after the first few races of the year seems to have been whittled away. I still find it crazy that he's got 5 races in a row where he's not reached Q3 in a Red Bull. But I think that Verstappen and Ricciardo notoriously are very good friends. They get on very well. Would you have are they thinking, would you have a happier Verstappen if Ricciardo was in the team? Maybe because Verstappen would be a more happy person, but also Ricciardo would be less of a threat, because I think that he's not going to get as many points as Perez is. I don't think he's going to be as up to speed as Perez would be, personally. So I might be a bit worried if I'm Perez. Maybe that worry is stemmed from the fact that there's always just a little bit of rumour and talk about the second Red Bull seat that I feel like there has been for years now, whether it was as Sebastian Vettel's teammate back in the 2010s or whether it was Verstappen's teammate or Ricciardo's teammate back in the mid to late 2010s. There's always been gossip about that seat, I think. Would I be worried? I think possibly with Perez. I think that simply because also it coincides, as these things often do, with the drop-off that he's seen in the last couple of races. I think he's under a bit of pressure now. But saying all that, Ricciardo could then come in and have an awful start, and then we're not talking about that anymore. So I think I'd probably be a little bit worried if I was him overall. But time will tell. It's so easy to say time will tell, but I think it will, honestly.
Yeah, we're looking forward then to the Hungarian Grand Prix and indeed the remainder of the season when it comes to Alpha Tauri, Daniel Ricciardo, Perez, all to play for really there. Maybe the leverage, if you will, has shifted more in the direction of Team Red Bull versus Perez. But we first of all, or second of all, must apologise to McLaren because this breaking news story on the Tuesday has really disrupted our schedule. The schedule was to go and have McLaren as the top story because the weekend really does belong to them, really. I can't believe I'm saying that. They qualified in Q2, Q3. They momentarily, being Lando Norris, took P1 and they finished in P2 and P4. And I think it's fair to say the safety car had a handle in that one for Mr. Piastri to not get on the podium, unfortunately. But without sounding too smug, I think it's fair to say those green shoots are sprouting quite nicely, aren't they?
Yes. I can see a smug smile emerging in some parts of the world. It's quite something. Like, I had to blink twice because after qualifying, I thought, the second and third, it must have been wet. Oh wait, no, it was completely dry. It was dry, and that's how the genuine representative pace is, and it's. I think it is refreshing to see how we talk about often how the pecking order can stay the same in F1 and how you have little changes year on year, but it stays the same generally, and that's probably fair. But I think it's been really refreshing this year to see, firstly, Aston Martin leap from 7th to 2nd, effectively, or 7th to 3rd currently in terms of the constructors' position, and how they've been able to jump up so high. It's been brilliant to see that. And now McLaren as well. They've gone from in Bahrain, there was an argument for them being the slowest car at the start of the year. They were absolutely woeful. It's probably them and Williams at the bottom of the timesheets. It was a dire situation. And to go from that to even in other races, like I look at Spain and Canada as well, where they showed some pretty average results, and now all of a sudden they are legitimately the second fastest car, and they were looking absolutely brilliant at Silverstone. I think it will be track specific. I think that, and that's what they're alluding to as well in the team. I think they're quite realistic about that. Silverstone, full of high speed corners, low speed is less of a factor. So they were belting quick through the high speed, but I think you get to a circuit like Hungary, for example, and they'll drop. But then Spa, after that, with high speed, they could rise again. I think that it's a brilliant sign for them, and also a great lift in the Constructors' Championship. They've gone from flirting with Williams and Haas down there in 7th to leapfrogging Alpine and taking more of a stranglehold of that 5th place. So green shoots, absolutely. They've had like an overnight. It's like they've been in hibernation for a little while, and they've had an overnight sprout of McLaren. I just want to give obviously all the plaudits. I think not all the plaudits, but I think a lot of the plaudits will go to Norris, because obviously he drove brilliantly, and I mean I've been saying personally, and I'm sure lots of people have for a long time, how good he is. I think this weekend, this shows what he'd be like in a good car. I think he's an extremely good driver, and he needs a good car to show his absolute best talent, because he's been in average cars over the years, and that was his 7th podium as a Formula 1 driver, which is a very impressive statistic in what is effectively a midfield car, or has been a midfield car for a while. But aside from him, I think Oscar Piastri was absolutely brilliant. I think that he's had a low-key start based on the hype. Remember, it was this time last year when all the court cases and everything and all the drama that preceded him joining the team. I think that all of that was inevitably going to lead to people saying, wow, when he comes to Formula 1, he better be like the best thing since sliced bread. And because he hasn't been the best thing since sliced bread, I think people have been maybe on his back a little bit, but he's been quietly moving up, doing better, up against possibly one of the toughest teammates in F1. I think this weekend he had an absolutely brilliant weekend. Like you said, safety car shafted him a little bit, stopped him getting on the podium. If you watch the start back, Norris gets an absolute belter, doesn't he, off the line? But Piastri as well. Piastri launched and he kind of got to the inside, but then didn't have any room because Norris and Verstappen were battling. On another day, on another track, he's in the lead off the back of that momentum. So, yeah, green shoots. I don't know what the exaggerated version of green shoots or the next level of green shoots would be, but it definitely felt like that this weekend. They were absolutely stunning, the McLarens.
Exactly, it's like Jack and the Beanstalk, isn't it, really, in terms of how well they've been doing over one or two races. But you're right there with your earlier point. It's so good to see that when you look at Spain, for example, and Canada, you've got Mercedes doing better than expected, and then go to Austria and Ferrari doing better than expected, and then you go to this Grand Prix and it's McLaren who are doing excellent both in qualifying and then converting that for the race. It's a shame, obviously, we don't see that at the very top of the grid, but it's without recycling the same use of words. Again, green shoots to the sport moving forward and how the regulations can work. But yes, congratulations to McLaren. Really, it's one thing to go and have a good qualifying pace, and as they did in Monaco, it's another thing, indeed, a different one entirely, to go and convert that. And I think that feelings of calm and consistency were really evident when it came to both drivers, which is something we haven't seen in a while, really. I'd say we haven't seen that with respect when Daniel Ricciardo was at the team, because there was one driver doing so well and the other one lagging behind. I think that Norris and Piastri have got the making of a Norris and Sainz duo, if you will, where they're both consistently up there, and indeed there's no weak link at all. And from Monaco, really, to mention that again, McLaren really have been building slowly, and indeed it's exploded now when it comes to this Grand Prix and the result. And for me, I'm looking very much at the Netherlands Grand Prix, the Belgian Grand Prix as well, in terms of the circuit makeup, because for me, if just looking at the upcoming calendar or remainder of it, they're probably the most similar circuits to Silverstone that we've got left. I can't imagine, for example, going to Hungary, they're going to be doing as well. It may be more of a sort of, I suppose, back to basics, if you will, a humbler, keeping feet on ground and all that, when we see historically how they've not been amazing at circuits like that. But definitely reasons to be optimistic, and they're now challenging Alpine after once again a double DNF for that team. And who's to say they can't not only consolidate that place but also look a bit higher as well, because once again we saw Ferrari having an indifferent weekend, we saw strategy not working out for them. Granted, the safety car really didn't help and the hards just weren't working for them, but it's a huge deficit, I grant you. But if they can carry on in this vein, they can at least trouble them and then hopefully build on from this moving into next season, not have such a delayed or slow start, really. Because I think when you're looking at how well they're doing now and how well they can do and have done previously in races gone by, I think a lot of people will be kicking themselves, really, because the talent's there in the car, but the car itself is taking time, really. But I think there's shockwaves going through the paddock, particularly when it comes to Mercedes, for example. Lewis Hamilton calling for serious conversations about the direction of the car, but remains to be seen, I suppose, what this will do for McLaren and what this will mean for Aston Martin and the entirety of the grid bar Red Bull, really. But so good to see. The question is, I suppose, from this, do you expect McLaren to cash in and beat Alpine? Can they do it? Or is this once again a last sort of mad dash, if you will, that they may fall shy of again?
I think I can see them cashing in simply because, other than Monaco, where Alpine got 3rd and 7th, and that was their standout result of the year. They haven't had a result like this similar to McLaren that McLaren have had, because Alpine, the Monaco race, they were on a track where their Ocon qualified well, he had track position, and realistically he wasn't going to be surpassed for that 3rd place. But this is a circuit where overtaking can happen aplenty. There'll be plenty of chances for a team who were strong in qualifying but less strong in the race to fall back and to not hammer home the advantage. But that didn't happen to McLaren. They absolutely hammered home their advantage. They took, other than the only reason they didn't take the maximum points on offer would have been because of the safety car, the piece of bad luck with Piastri. Otherwise, they would have been taking home 33 points, which would have been quite incredible. I'm glad you asked me a question, because I was preparing my question of my own to you, which was it could go under the bold category. With this, are McLaren contenders for a race win later in the season?
Ooh, well, if you'd have asked me that a few weekends ago, I'd have called you crazy. But looking at how well someone like Aston Martin have done to specific tracks, they've tailed off slightly. Who's to say after this weekend they're looking forward to circuits that are more similar to Silverstone? They can't get a bit of luck, for example, can't at least get a double podium. I mean, at the moment, I'm going to jinx this horribly, no doubt, but it seems that Red Bull, Verstappen, if we're being honest and specific, look unstoppable. If we're being honest, they look Teflon, they look indestructible, use any other word you want to, but I think it's only going to be luck that's going to go and make a McLaren victory. But a McLaren victory is now possible, if I'm being honest. I think a McLaren victory is probably more likely than a Ferrari victory, but granted, that's because of Ferrari's interesting decisions, if I'm going to put it diplomatically.
Yeah, and I say also, is it too harsh to argue that a McLaren victory currently looks more likely than an Aston Martin victory? Because Aston Martin have dropped off quite a little bit in the last few races. They're still maintaining a good enough rate of points to keep in the battle for second in the Constructors, but I don't think it's too unfair to say that McLaren winning a race, like you say, at a circuit like Spa or Zandvoort. I'm trying to look at the rest of the calendar in terms of high-speed circuits. I guess you've got Brazil, Sao Paulo later in the season. I suppose that upgrades may come more into the equation later on the season, but there's a couple of races coming up. Monza as well, with its high speed. There's a couple of races coming up where McLaren could definitely be race win contenders due to the less chance that they'll be overtaken in the foreseeable future. And I think it's exciting for F1 fans that we got another potential winner in the realms of the grid at the moment. And I think it's a great shame for Tristan that he was not here today, because I'm sure he would have been. We wouldn't have been able to get a word in edgeways were he to be on the podcast, such as his passion for the boys in orange and chrome this weekend.
Yeah, indeed. Lovely livery, and I think they converted that without just looking pretty, if you will. I'd agree there. I think there's 5 constructors who can win a race on their day. I think if you were to go and say to me, put a bet down now, who's going to win a race that's not Red Bull, I'd probably say Mercedes or McLaren. But granted, this is only one good race for McLaren, so maybe I'm just drinking too much of the Kool-Aid. But definitely the Mercedes cars look the better ones in terms of their ability. I mean that by the works team and McLaren. And, well, Aston Martin have had their time, but maybe they've had their time in the sun, and that was at the start of the season. So I think eyes on them when it comes to Hungary and moving forwards, with a slight caveat when it comes to Aston Martin, because they're having a bit of the McLaren syndrome, if you will. One driver pulling the team along, the other one pulling it in the different direction. But yes, I suppose we can't not talk as well about another issue, a smaller issue granted, the safety car. That was one that triggered change in the race, I think it's fair to say. You had Magnussen DNFing, you had the Haas team not showing great reliability, and out popped a virtual safety car when he was parked on, I believe, Hangar Straight, and then that soon became a safety car. Now, there's always winners and losers from this setup. Tsunoda, Bottas, Albon and Leclerc are some. But for me, when a car's smoking away, on fire, in that part of the track, why is there not a full safety car? Do you think it was weird for there to be a virtual safety car and not a full safety car?
Yes, I can see the argument why, because especially we think the main thing with car being on fire, if there's oil on the track, that's dangerous, isn't it? That's the dangerous part. So I think that there's definitely an argument for it. I think that there will always be a reason for the race stewards making the decisions they did, but I'd say that, I don't know, it's a tricky one, because it's very easy to say there are lots of decisions which stewards make where you find yourself saying, "Oh, I wouldn't have made that decision. What are they doing? Do they know what they're doing with their job?" But yeah, it's a tricky one. But I think that at least we can say that my point of view of it would be that if that is the thing that we're focusing on in terms of what's happened in terms of stewarding, then I say we're not doing too badly. If you think of some of the some of the things we've had over the last year or two that we've gone on plentiful on this podcast, it's not ended up too badly, I'd say. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I have to agree. It's not exactly a huge issue. It's more of a nitpick, really, insofar as the race, which wasn't too eventful. I just thought it was quite bizarre. And I don't mean that insofar as I'm wanting stewards to go and throw yellow flags, red flags, whatever flags, whenever there's the slightest bit of danger. But I just thought the nature of it, where it was, I thought they would have come down a bit more hard with a safety car, judging by how often they go and throw that to a point. And also delay races and make people go, or indeed the drivers go through the paddock, the pit lane when it comes to issues. So I just thought it was a bit out of character, is the way I put it. But there was no harm done. I mean, there's always going to be winners and losers from a virtual safety car to a safety car, or a safety car to a safety car, if you will. Norris and Verstappen were huge winners. Piastri a loser. So I suppose that's Formula One, that's racing, to quote the famous Daniel Kvyat, who's no doubt looking forward to what his successor in both, in the Alpha Tauri is going to be doing moving forwards, on a slight caveat. But looking away from that caveat now, let's return to another team that's done very well, albeit further down the grid, but still point to points, and it's particularly huge for Williams Racing. Alex Albon qualified 8th, finished in 8th, and something that raised more eyebrows, I think, than Albon converting at more points or a good qualifying position. Mr. Sargent qualified 14th, up to P11, not a point, unfortunately, one away from it. But Tristan's P7 prediction for Williams in the Constructors is looking pretty now, because they are there. They're in P7, they've got 11 points, joint albeit. Our thoughts on Williams, they're starting to go and make it consistent rather than just a one-off, if you will.
I forgot about that prediction. I forgot we also called him crazy, I think, when he did that.
We did.
Yeah, I mean,
we did.
Yeah, it's not... yikes. But at the same time, I mean, what you said Alfa Romeo to come fourth, so, I mean, to be fair, that's...
that was AI. That was a deep fake.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we're right to mention Williams, or should we call them Alex Albon Mercedes rather than a Williams Mercedes? Or is that maybe a bit harsh? Because Sargent has been stepping up in recent races. I think that he is still showing a pace deficiency to Albon, but then Albon's good, isn't he? He's very good at the moment. He's showing excellent turn of speed. He is arguably, some might say, making a case for that second Red Bull seat. Some might say. I mean, probably I think in his mind, he seems to at least have distanced himself from Red Bull, and he's saying categorically now that Williams is his future. And I can see why, to be fair, because they seem to be on the up. Remember at the start of the year, they appointed James Vowles, the former Mercedes chief strategist. He's the current team principal there. New beginning, new life at Mercedes. New life at Williams. And I'm not saying all the improvement is down to him necessarily, but they're definitely showing an improved trajectory in terms of where they're going. He's producing some barnstorming results. 8th in qualifying to 8th in the race this weekend just gone. Brilliant result. We spoke about his 7th in Canada, where he used all his skills with tyre management, but also cleverly used the Williams car to his advantage. And I think he did it at Silverstone again this weekend in terms of how the car is fast in a straight line. And that meant that whether he could keep up with cars such as Perez or Alonso or the Ferraris, not always, but could he hold them back in a train and break the DRS train, get close enough to someone in front of him? Yes, he could, and he did that absolutely brilliantly. I think that was the foundation of his 8th place finish, and to finish ahead of both Ferraris is definitely an eye-catching result, and they are on the up. They are now ahead of, as you mentioned, up to 7th, so they've dipped ahead of Haas on count back because they both had a 7th, but then Haas do not have an 8th place, whereas Alex Albon and Williams do. And also ahead of Alfa Romeo, lest we forget. So they've jumped ahead of Alfa Romeo likewise, and they are sitting pretty in 7th place. I don't think they're getting any higher because Alpine and McLaren have both had strong enough starts to the season that they are further ahead, but Williams are looking good. And again, if we spoke about McLaren being track specific, I think the Williams probably more track specific as well. They've had some good upgrades, sure, but I think they're going to be stronger on tracks where straight line speed is paramount, like Spa, like Monza, which are actually both coming up, of course. So,
indeed,
yeah, very good for them. I think if we're talking about green shoots, they are in the category of green shoots because they've really turned a corner recently. And I didn't think that after their season last year, where they came last in the constructors, they gained solitary 8 points. They've already beaten their total from last year, so they're doing an excellent job. And I argue their trajectory is set to continue. Would that be fair to say?
It certainly looks that way, doesn't it? They've got a young team principal who's just moved over and already had a good effect, I think it's fair to say. You've got a team leader in Albon who's starting to mould into that nicely. You've got Logan Sargent, someone who's improving, keeping the car on track, which may sort of provoke some laughter, if you will, but it's so important really when you have someone like him, the ability to go and make steady improvements versus, with respect to Latifi, bidding into the wall more often than you'd like. So in that aspect, I think that P7 is certainly possible for Williams. I think you're right, it's looking fairly unlikely they'll rise higher than that. But the fact that they're there is remarkable, really. The fact that we scoffed at Tristan's prediction speaks volumes, really, about how well they're doing. And they are cashing in and making a consistent play with what they've got. And seeing how well they did in practice, for example, is frankly unprecedented, huge, other words that you want to use, really. So congratulations to them. I think they'll keep that 7th place, if I'm honest, or indeed may dip down to 8th. But I can't see any below that, really, when we look at Alpha Tauri, how poorly they're doing, Alfa Romeo, how poorly they're doing, Haas, reliability issues, consistent from Austria through to Silverstone as well, not looking great for them, and they're not scoring too many points in the sort of more recent races or part of the season. So the open goals there, if you will, are chances there for Williams to go and cash in, and I think that Williams may struggle to keep hold of Alex Albon moving forwards. Now, this all depends on where other drivers go, what happens in the markets. And I'm not saying for one moment this is imminent, but I can see a scenario where Norris goes to Red Bull, Albon goes to McLaren, and then someone has to go and fill that Williams seat. But, I mean, obviously, if you're a Williams fan or a Williams employee or affiliated, you want me to just shut up because it's so good at the moment for them. But do you think that's possible? Could Albon go to McLaren, maybe?
I think that, as is such as Formula One, the more and more you do in a team which is lower down the grid, the more and more your prospects for moving up the grid are improved, and for which the argument against it is lessened. That's a nice little switch you've got there. Norris to Red Bull, we know that they're interested in him. We know that Verstappen and Norris are good friends. We know that Norris actually turned down Red Bull's advances about a year or so ago, which looks like a interesting decision, shall we say, in hindsight. And if there's interest there, and if there's a want, there's a will, to be honest, as is sometimes the case. So that's a move I can see happening, and a nice replacement at McLaren. Albon and Piastri sounds quite nice in the McLaren car. Could we possibly see it may be a couple of years off, because Hamilton looks like he's returning to somewhere near his peak after a rocky year last year. But could in the future there be a possibility of an Albon-Russell pairing at Mercedes? You know, as a replacement. There's links there. James Vowles used to work for Mercedes. As much as they wouldn't want that to be a sign of a satellite team, is there a possibility of it happening? I wouldn't rule that out either, but I think that Albon's definitely doing himself no disservice, shall we say, to keep on upping his performance levels as he is.
Definitely, and I think if you were to go and look at the constructors in a more crude fashion and say there's the top 6, as stands of Red Bull, looking down to Alpine. I'm looking at the standings as is. And then 7th to 10th are, quote, smaller teams, I think it's fair to say, satellite teams, B teams, affiliated teams, etc. I think if you're looking at those 8 drivers there at the bottom from 7th to 10th, he is certainly the pick of the bunch to go and make that step up, really. And I think we're seeing why he was part of that Red Bull team for so long, why he was given the chance so young as well in the Works team. And I think we may see an interesting character arc, a character arc better than Daniel Ricciardo, for example. Maybe something, albeit a diluted version, but a version like Alonso where people thought, oh, well, he's done and dusted, he's not coming back, he's had his chance in the sun, that's that, off your pub. And he comes back and proves everyone wrong, granted to a lesser extent. But I think if you're Mr. Albon, things looking pretty where you are, or indeed where you could go in the future. So congratulations to him, he thoroughly deserves it. And on that bombshell, that seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 21 of F1 in Review 2023. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, featuring just myself and Angus. Rest assured, Tristan will return. He's moving home, a spoiler alert, and was not able to be here this weekend, but or indeed this recording session, but he'll be back in action next week, so any Tristan fans, don't you worry. You can follow us on Twitter and TikTok as well, F1 in Review being our handle there, and we will return next week, as I say, to discuss a bit more about the Silverstone Grand Prix, the British Grand Prix, and to look forward to the Hungarian Grand Prix. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.